of the biggest forms of entertainment since the 1920s has been movies. Now, when video games came into the mainstream as a new form of entertainment, of course there were going to be video games based off movies.
Throughout the 70s and 80s, many popular film studios would get the video game treatment if it meant extra revenue for the studio. Nowadays, there aren't nearly as many video games that are being made that are based off movies, but back in the day, there were tons. Even movies you wouldn't expect were getting video games. Non-action movies such as Home Alone and Wayne's World got games. There were tons of Disney-related games, Star Wars games, and even some obscure rare titles that go for really high prices nowadays, such as Halloween and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Now, of course, many of these games ended up being cash grabs that were total shit, like E.T. on the Atari 2600, Ghostbusters on the NES, or Iron Man 2 on the Wii. But there were also quite a few good titles over the years. So today I'm going to be doing a video on the top 10 best video games based on movies. I'll be talking about the games that did the best justice to the source material and created an actually fun and entertaining experience that was based off a movie of the same or similar name.
Number 10, Terminator 2 Judgment Day arcade version on the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. You play as a robot and you kill robots.
Simple as that.
No, in all seriousness, it was the perfect just keep on shooting kind of game. It started out as a simple Midway style game in arcades across America. Little bastards would line up all over the place to get a taste of that game. It is still to this day one of the best and most exciting arcade games ever made. It was easily one of the most popular and long-lasting arcade games as well, and it can still be found in a select few arcades in the country. For only 4 quarters, you could feel like you were in the movie as you played in one of the final battles of the film. The whole game was an intense, action-packed experience that just got harder and harder as the levels went by. Although it started in arcades, it eventually was brought to the home console on the Super Nintendo.
This was one of the first video games I ever played in my life, and my family actually had a good family friend who had a Super Nintendo in their RV with this game in it, and it was all hooked up and ready to go. You know, camping. Playing video games in the RV.
I still have fond memories dated up to 15 years ago of just hanging out in the mountains in that RV with nothing but a comfy trailer couch and the fast-paced action-adventure of the war against the machines. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone on the Nintendo GameCube, PlayStation 2, and Xbox. Harry Potter was the best book to movie to video game franchise back in the early 2000s. The early Harry Potter games were nearly perfect, with many scenes based off the movies and many new and creatively added experiences available in the games as well. The later Harry Potter games, not so much. No, seriously, fuck those games. Though I think most people who have played the Harry Potter games can agree that the first and second game were the best. They were both released within a short period of time of one another, and they gave the player an experience full of magic and mystery. Electronic Arts did the perfect job of transitioning the stories of the movies onto the silver screen. My personal favorite of these games was Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, the first movie in the series, but ironically the second game released by EA on the PlayStation 2, GameCube, and Xbox. The original version of Sorcerer's Stone was released on the PC and PS1, which in my opinion was a bit inferior to the later version. The later version was bigger and better in every way possible. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone closely follows the general storyline of the first movie with a few added scenes every now and then, just so they can offer up more gameplay and adventure. Parts of the story are told through cutscenes while you play the action and experiences. Besides the main characters, many side characters can be found in the game along with many of the locations, which made it feel as if you were part of Hogwarts and the land that surrounds it. This game was full of exploration. Exploring the castle, the Forbidden Forest, and the dungeons beneath the land was one of the absolute best aspects of the game. My personal favorite aspect though would have to be the score. The score was composed by Jeremy Soule, who went on to compose the Elder Scrolls game, which is super cool. You get to play as Harry and cast spells, fight enemies, fight bosses, interact with your classmates, do side quests around the school, and a whole lot more. This game played very similar to a Zelda game, which is something that felt so familiar and enjoyable at the same time.
This was a game that followed the source material very well while bringing a lot of fun and entertainment to the table also. If you're a Harry Potter fan or even an open world fantasy fan, I think this game is definitely worth your time and you would really enjoy a playthrough of it, at least once. Or in my case, like 60 times.
The Incredibles on the Nintendo GameCube, PlayStation 2, and Xbox. Being one of the most popular and heavily praised Pixar movies of all time, it should come as no surprise that this game is absolutely awesome. The movie itself is Pixar's only real action movie, and it features superheroes, explosions, guns, and all the good stuff we'd look for in an action film. This video game did exactly what it's supposed to, as every level directly related to the story of the movie. Although it added many new scenes, enemies, and locations, everything still fit in perfectly and felt like it belonged in an Incredibles video game. It was a solid action game where you got to play as all the heroes in the Incredibles family and use all their special powers to fight your way through each level and each memorable scene from the movie. Many of the levels directly mirror parts of the movie, which is one of the reasons why I still love this game to this day after all these years. Another big reason is because this game was one of the first games I ever played on my first console, the GameCube. All of the heroes have the same powers they do in the movie. Mr. Incredible has super strength, Elastigirl has flexibility, which was always one of my favorite parts because it allowed to stretch across areas in a very fun playstyle. And there's Dash, who can run super fast, although the levels with him were sometimes a huge pain in the ass. They were still a lot of fun nonetheless. The last playable hero was Violet, who had the power of invisibility. Now the level where you play as her is pretty challenging and was damn near impossible when I first had the game as a young kid, but somehow still beat it pretty quickly. The graphics for this game aren't too bad at all, which still makes it a fun experience if you were to pick this game up nowadays and give it a try. There are also cutscenes throughout the game which are taken straight from the movie, which is great because it makes the story of the game feel identical to the film. This is a game that has such fun gameplay that really anyone could enjoy it. Even though it's a Disney game, it's really not just geared towards kids, as it features a lot of fun action gameplay. The fighting elements are awesome to use, especially when playing as Mr. Incredible. Throwing items to unlock certain areas was a cool addition to the game as it changes things up a bit, except look at the size of these soda cans that you throw.
Jesus.
One of the only downsides of this game is the camera control. I mean, you'll eventually get used to it, but still, it's a bit different at first and a little awkward to use. The main goal of each level is to kill the bad guys while you race to the end, and sometimes you'll have to do certain things to unlock passages and areas, such as lifting a bar to make a path or pushing a button.
We need to push the button.
Man, Desmond, get the fuck out of here. Overall, that's The Incredibles. If you love the animated action film, then you'll definitely enjoy the video game. Aladdin on the Sega Genesis.
A lot more attention and care went into the Sega Genesis port of this game rather than the Super Nintendo version, which was not nearly as good.
This side-scroller platform game themed around the Disney classic was made by Virgin Interactive instead of Capcom, who released the Super Nintendo version. Virgin Interactive got everything they could to be perfect by giving Aladdin the use of a sword, music straight from the film such as Arabian Nights and A Whole New World, and the world and atmosphere brought to life throughout the levels matched the mood of the film perfectly. This makes a lot of sense as the same Disney artists who worked on the movie worked on this version of the game at the same time. The Super Nintendo version lacked in this department at times, so it was nice to have a version of the game that matched the feel of the movie so well. Not only did it match the source material, but each and every level had so much fun and adventure in store for the player. Although when the player dies, I do have to say, this death scene is a little creepy. What the fuck was that? The graphics were great, the music was great, you actually got really good weapons compared to the Super Nintendo version, and overall, it was a fantastic Disney game. Except, why was there a stop sign in the desert? Ghostbusters on the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. Back in 1984 when Ghostbusters first released in theaters, this was the video game choice that audiences had. Yeah. It was the absolute farthest of the shit end of the stick you could get as far as video game adaptations go. Adaptations? I think I said that right. This game, which was released on the NES by LGN Games, was a disgrace to the Ghostbusters movie and to video games in general. After the garbage NES games based off the two Ghostbusters movies came out, and after a couple more average Sega games based off the series, it seemed impossible that a great Ghostbusters game would ever be a thing. It wasn't until 25 years later when a new Ghostbusters game was made. This was what Ghostbusters fans had waited years for, and it was totally worth it. This 2009 shooter-type game used ghost-catching weapons is essentially the franchise's third film. It plays out as if there was a sequel to Ghostbusters 2, and it's perfectly fitting in that way. The best part about this game, other than the stunning graphics and music for the time, was the fact that you actually got to play in the role as a real Ghostbuster.
It was amazing and gave fans exactly what they wanted to see, plus it used actual ideas and subject matter that was used in the movies.
Not whatever this driving around town and purchasing your ghost weapon bullshit this was. Number 5. The Godfather series on the Xbox 360, PlayStation 2, Wii, and Xbox. For this spot on the list, I'm looking at a whole series rather than just one game. The Godfather series is a series of sandbox games based around the 3 classic films of the same name. It's very similar to many other games in the crime sandbox genre in the way that you take on criminal activities in order to earn money and earn a name for yourself. The first game can be very repetitive at times, but in my opinion, it does not take away from the fun at all, and it's pretty exciting. When EA made the second game, they really fixed the whole repetitive issue that people had with it, as well as completely upgrading every element and mechanic in the game. The environment and world is awesome. There are safe houses for yourself and your rivals, which are nicely designed, and the landscape of New York City is actually fairly realistic, and it was improved from the first to second game. The environment and missions of the game remind me so much of the movies, and it has that great Godfather feel.
This game pretty much plays out as if you're part of the story. One of the best and most realistic features in the game is the fact that you can level up your weapons. That was always one of my absolute favorite parts about playing this game.
My personal favorite feature of this game though would have to be the fatal execution system, where you can target specific limbs while in combat in a very similar fashion to the Fallout games. Although these games are sometimes predictable and too much alike to other crime games, they are still great and very empowering to the fans of the film series. Number 4. Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor on the PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, Xbox 360, Xbox One, and PC. Although it's not directly tied to any of the Lord of the Rings or Hobbit films, I just had to include this on my list, due to the fact that it's set in the same universe as those movies. This game was a huge hit when it was released 2 years back, and I think I speak for many when I say that one of the greatest and most memorable aspects of playing this game was the combat. The combat is so smooth, and it's fun for every second of play. My favorite part about the combat is that you feel like an absolute god during battle, but it's also challenging at times, especially when it needs to be, so it isn't too easy for the player. The hierarchy of enemies were also very different and unique from one another, which made defeating them have much more meaning than simply killing a random enemy in, let's say, an Elder Scrolls or Witcher type game. This game was full of unpredictable battles throughout the missions that you really didn't know what was going to be next. Destroying your enemies was an overall fantastic time. Whenever you had victory over an enemy, it just felt so rewarding. Exploring in this game was another one of the most rewarding parts of this game, as the world was an amazing looking open world full of Lord of the Rings lore to find. This game feels much different than other games in the genre, as it has a special layer of details that makes it a very exciting experience for fans of the Lord of the Rings films. The skills tree and the different types of combat available to use on each enemy were some little features that were really nice to use, as well as the fact that dying actually meant something in this game. Something I really don't see much in that many games. The only disappointing part of this game was that the final battle did seem to be a bit underwhelming considering the amazing battles that led up to it. I feel that the beauty of the graphics and the combat styles of the game completely outweigh the disappointment of the final battle though.
The battles just make you feel like you're kicking ass inside of this Lord of the Rings world and universe that is put together in such amazing detail. It just makes the experience overall fantastic.
Star Wars Battlefront and Star Wars Battlefront 2 on the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and PC. I'm grouping these two together because it's just too hard for me to pick one or the other, and essentially, they're the same game. Both of these games were quite a treat in many ways. First of all, playing through these games gave you so much nostalgia of the films, and it made you feel like you were part of the Star Wars experience. Being able to play in a Call of Duty or Battlefield type game as Star Wars characters was an amazing treat and a lot of fun. Many complained back in the day that the solo missions are standalone and don't tie to one another, so there's no actual story, but I always found that to be part of the charm of these games. They were fun little missions that you could play without dedicating yourself to an entire storyline. It's a game that has missions that are all very different from one another, which I always loved. I think that was always sort of the point of these games. It's a co-op team deathmatch title, and it's really all about the battles. That was the purpose of this game in the first place. We already had many Star Wars titles where you could play through events and storylines from the film, my personal favorites being the Super Star Wars games and Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith.
As for the Battlefront games, the graphics and the sound effects were actually pretty decent for the time, and the music was amazing because it was coming straight from the original movies. The locations and battles present throughout the games also added a layer of realism to it, which was amazing because it felt like you were actually part of a large-scale Star Wars war that you would have seen in one of the first 6 films. It was awesome.
The only downside in my opinion is that the games were a bit too easy sometimes, so if you're in for a challenge, these games really aren't for you. Although there may be some better Star Wars game titles out there, such as the Rogue Leader games or TIE Fighter, the Battlefront games will always be my favorite because of the locations, weapons, and characters. I think most Star Wars fans can appreciate this game because of the fact that it really does feel like you are playing through some epic full-scale wars you've seen in a Star Wars movie. As for the new EA Battlefront, fuck that. It's fun for about 15 minutes, and there's no way I'm paying for DLC. Spider-Man 2 on the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and Nintendo GameCube. Many people who grew up around the same time I did had to have seen this one coming. The first Spider-Man game, while decent and fun at times, didn't match in comparison to the fun and adventure that the game based off the second movie had in store. One of the biggest and best accomplishments for the developers of this game is the fact that they were able to create an amazing New York City environment in the limited time that they had to work on this game. It looked great. and it was fairly big for being released in 2004. In this game, we could swing across webs for hours on end, but this time we were actually able to land on the ground and explore the streets. The controls were great and felt very smooth, the combat was a lot of fun, and it worked perfectly as it should for a Spider-Man game, and the plot was actually pretty entertaining and exciting as well. It was taken straight from the movie, and you practically got to play through every big event from the classic superhero action film. There were even extra missions where you got to play against Black Cat, Shocker, and Rey Mysterio.
Wait. That's not right. That's not right. It's not correct. Oh. That's right. It's just Mysterio. Yeah, just Mysterio. Okay.
In my opinion, there has not been a single game made based off any of the Marvel Universe movies that will ever top the fun and excitement that this game had in store. Number 1. GoldenEye 007 on the Nintendo 64. Okay, I'm pretty sure that most of you expected this. This has often been considered to be the best movie-based video game and one of the best FPS games from the 1990s for years. Sure, it's expected and not original for me to have this on the list, but I just had to talk about it and really give my opinion on why this video game is praised as one of the best and why I consider this to be the greatest movie-based video game of all time. In this game, you are taken on a story-driven first-person shooting adventure as James Bond. In the classic game, you get to play through the events of the film GoldenEye, which is often considered to be one of the best James Bond films of that era. The missions in this movie were way bigger and way better than before, and with this game, you got to see it all. I think one of the biggest reasons this game has held up so well over the years is because of all the gadgets you had right at your fingertips to play within the game. It was a different kind of FPS game as you played as a spy. It wasn't like other popular games in the genre at the time such as Doom and Wolfenstein. I mean, with all the stuff you were able to do with those gadgets, there's no way that you couldn't have a good time while playing. The single player was awesome, but there was also a multiplayer which was even better because it gave you a fully customized game, and you could do anything and everything with those gadgets and weapons. A lot of you are probably thinking, well, nowadays, what's it like to play this?
Sure, the graphics and sound effects are not great, and kids nowadays would think that this game sucks. But at the time, this game really was truly a landmark for first-person shooters, movie-based video games, and just games in general.
It was a masterpiece when it came out, and it changed multiplayer games and FPS games for the best, and that's what makes it hold up to this day.
So what do you think the best movie-based game is? And what would be your top 10 list? I would love to hear what you guys think and what your favorites are, so go ahead and comment down below and tell me all about that. One more thing to think about is why are movie-based video games so obscure nowadays? I mean seriously, think about it. Besides the select few exceptions and the LEGO games which come out pretty often, there really aren't a whole lot of them anymore.
It's interesting, but possibly for the best. And maybe someday I'll do a list on the top 10 worst movie-based video games because there's definitely many more bad movie video games than there are good.
Have a question, comment, or concern? Or maybe you just want to know more about upcoming videos? Check me out and follow me on Twitter for exclusive updates and more. Hello everybody, thank you for watching the newest episode of the Retrospect Lounge. If you enjoyed it, why not go ahead and like the video and comment on the video and tell me what you think. Also, if you missed the first sneak peek trailer for the series, check that out right here. There's plenty more where this episode came from, so stay tuned.